Hello everybody. I thought today I would do something fairly simple, which is a sailboat scene. And I was inspired by a very nice photograph taken by a friend of mine, Paul Doherty, and I liked it a lot. And so that was my inspiration, but I decided to change it a bit because the photograph provided beautiful light and shadow, but not the detail that I needed to feel comfortable that I was getting it right. So I took out one of my sailing books. I have several of them, which if I'm going to do a subject, I like to have books about that subject, and I've done a number of sailing paintings. So one of the things, of course, that's really important to get right is the ratio of mast to boat and width of the boat. And so I had decided that I wanted to change the layout a bit from what Paul had, and also the perspective. So this is looking more down on the boats, like a crow's view, and I measured the mass in order to get the ratios. Now I put in these lines for the various, again, what I wasn't able to see in the photograph that inspired me were all the lines that hold the mast up and the various details in here. And while some of those will be lost during the painting process, I still wanted to get them in fairly correctly. I think you can see, let me just check the video. Yes, you can see. So, but what I'm going to keep is the idea of some light coming down from behind the boats, the distant shore, and the reflection. And as we have discussed before, reflection always comes to the viewer. So shadow is a little different. Now if the light were over here, you would get shadow this way, but still reflection this way. Oh, I have to run and see the dog. Okay, everybody, I'm sorry for the disruption, but sometimes it just happens. So anyway, I've measured carefully the ratio of mass to width to depth of the boat, and the distance between the cross wooden pieces, and looked carefully at the wires that come down and hold the mass up safe. I didn't put them all in, but I put a number in, and the sail tied up, and the size of the little opening. So there's an indication there of that, and I'll keep that there. And I basically took 3 of the different shapes of boats. This one here, and this one here, and this one here. But I made this one small and in the background. This one is here, and this one is here. So I basically used the information in the book to try to get it right, and drew this in. Let's see how it works. Then after that, I took my masking fluid. Now masking fluid is really annoying. It's nice when it works, but making it work is very, very hard, because as soon as you put it into the air, it dries. So it dries on your brush and ruins your brush, and on anything else you're using to spread it. sometimes any pointed object might be used to spread it. But usually I use a brush, and I dip the brush usually in dishwashing liquid, and that protects the hairs of the brush, and then wipe it a little bit and then put it in the masking fluid. But the only way that I happen to have masking fluid that is working is that I keep my bottles of masking fluid in a container upside down and with saran wrap, so that I can open it up pretty easily. It hasn't all stuck together. And somehow, I'm not sure why, but storing it upside down rather than right side up minimizes the air in the part that you want to reach with your brush. So anyway, I did use some masking fluid. This is Winsor Newton Art Masking Fluid. And what that does is it preserves the white of the paper. So you basically paint or somehow put it on with a stick you can use, a pointed stick, or a nib, what they call a nib. I don't have one here to show you. I had it here a little while ago. Oh yeah, here it is. It turns out that the brush that I used was this fairly inexpensive brush that was very fine. But I could have also used this nib, which is just rubber, and then it doesn't get ruined by the brush. And then as soon as I was finished, I washed the brush immediately with soapy water and try to get this off, because this is basically like rubber cement. And what it does is it coats that area and keeps the paint from coloring it. So that's called masking fluid. And what I'm going to do is use my very big brush to put some water on the upper part of the paper. And I'm going to create with my Aureolin yellow a light wash of yellow. Yeah, like that. This is a very, very transparent yellow. And since what I want to do is create, as it was in Paul Doherty's photograph, an area where the sun is, I'm not going to put it directly behind that mask. Instead, I'm going to create it here. And the way that I'm creating it is to leave white paper where you have the light. So I want that part essentially, let me wipe some of that paint off, essentially white. For some reason my paint was a little dirty, so I have some flecks of dirt which I have to now remove. Yeah, that's the problem about having a palette that I've been using for decades. And I do wipe it after every painting, but sometimes it has some dirt on it, or some granule of paint. But anyway, now that I've gotten that kind of center white area, and I'm going to just use my paper towel to make sure that I don't have a hard edge there. Okay? And I'm going to make my very transparent wash with this big brush. Okay? Getting a few little bits, maybe they were on the brush itself. It just doesn't get used very often. Okay. So, I'm going to wash that brush out a little bit more. This is just a big, normal household painting brush. And I'm going to take that brush again, take some more of that. And I had the soft bit of light there. And since the reflection of that will be down here, I'm going to leave that area. I'm going to leave an area here. Now on Paul Doherty's photograph, that light was exactly in the center. But I'm not going to do it that way. I could, but I'm just going to change it up. I like to, you know, I'm inspired by his work, and his photography is beautiful. But I like the idea of, in my painting, of making it a little off-center. So that's what I'm going to do. There's no right and wrong. There's only what the artist wants to do and what kind of suits your fancy that day to try out. Because a lot of times you're just trying things out to see how they'll work. Now, since I have already put white on there, I can basically go over this. I can go over these boats and trust, hopefully, that the white of the paper will be protected by that layer of, and I hope that's true. It was a fairly thin amount of masking fluid, and so that's a little more risky than when it's thicker. But I'm hopeful that that's protecting the white of my paper there. I had watered that masking fluid down a little bit in the past, so when I opened the bottle it was already a bit watered down. Okay, I'm just making sure, since this is a light color, I don't want any hairs and specks in there, which I imagine are coming from the brush. I don't know. Okay, so that's the beginning of that. So then the next step is, okay, that's the most transparent yellow that I have. That was a Rollian yellow. I'd like to go now a little more intense with a little deeper, and I'm working still, you know, and I went to a different brush. This one is not a house paint brush, but a watercolor brush made with Kolinsky sable hairs. So those hairs are known for holding a lot of water and being very soft. This is it's the most expensive brush there is, because it holds a lot of water, and so you can really mop up the paint and spread it. You see how nicely that works. So and I don't want to go all the way to the edge where I had that Rollian yellow, so I want to leave some of that, but then also blend a little bit by patting with my paper towel. You know, having a paper towel always with you is very handy, because not only do you have to like wipe some of the water off your brush if it's too wet, especially with these Kolinsky sable brushes, but I'm going to take a little more of that color. I want a little more up here, a little deeper. Okay. Oh no, there is. Really having some. Maybe it's actually some hairs in the water. But I changed my water. Anyway, so you can see what I'm trying to do. All right, now you wouldn't notice this if this were a darker color, but with a lighter color, it's picking up. And I really don't want any of them in there, even though I am going to go darker a little bit in some of this. Okay. Yeah. Now, there are some, one of the things I liked about the photograph that Paul Doherty did was that he did have some very nice, it was a very nice cloud that went across the sky. I might actually put in a bit more cloud than was in his sky. But in order to get the right color for the cloud, I need a sort of a soft gray. And as I've done before, that means I would probably best use my burnt sienna mixed with some blue, and that gives me together, here's some burnt sienna, see, and mixed with some ultramarine blue, which is this, and when you mix them together you get a warm gray. That's a pretty good color. I might just put a little more blue in it. Okay. I think you can see that warm gray. Okay. So, while this is still wet, I'm going to put in some of the clouds. Just very softly. And those clouds did reflect, and see, here you have the reflection of the sun here and the sun here. So since those clouds are under the sun, then I think that putting their reflection in this area might work. Okay, you see, because what I want to have is some of that reflection, and this set of clouds was just a little bigger, some of that reflection. Okay, coming down at near the bottom of those of the sun, and of course it would be lighter where the sun is. Okay, so I'm using a damp brush to kind of soften the edges of that. Just very damp, not taking the water from the brush, and just leaving it and trying to have it be just a little bit damp, and then so I can spread it out and not create, what I don't want to do is create blossoms by adding a lot of water. And as I pull some of this paint around, I'm touching my brush over on the damp paper towel to clean it a little bit, so that I'm not bringing the paint that I just touched over to the new area. Okay, and I'm going to take some of this away. Got some color over here that bled down, so I want to remove that. That's not doesn't belong there. So we have already the beginning of a scene. And I think to continue that a little bit more, I think I might put a little bit of very subtle orange. I think I'll use the Sennelier orange, which is a nice color. It's by the manufacturer Sennelier. Most of my paints are Daniel Smith, but I do like this Sennelier orange by Sennelier. So I think what I'm going to do, while the paper is still wet, I'm going to drop some orange into that sky, just a little bit here and there, to indicate the sunset. And some of that orange will be reflected in the water below. So just like I did before, I'm going to dry my brush with my paper towel and gently, because the paint below is still a bit damp, so the colors are blending pretty well because the yellow is still damp, and so the colors are mixing together nicely. Yeah, I think that's beginning to, so you can see how if you think about what you're doing ahead of time, you have a good little sketch with the proportions correct. You can look at a photograph, be inspired by it, but not copy it, you know, just be inspired by it and try to do something that has some sense of reality, and where the measurements also, I'm going to take a little more of the orange, and this center boat is sort of going to be a focal point of the painting. So having a little bit more contrast and orange in that area brings the eye a bit more to it. So that's what I'm going to do, just bring a bit more of this orange into this area. Not so much into the others, but, and then maybe a little bit coming down, keeping it, I'm just going to kind of keep it in the, more toward the center. All right. In order to just keep the most, that brighter, more interesting color in this center area, for the purpose of maintaining the focus in the center. While on the other hand, what I'm going to do is take some of this gray that I mixed and put some of that in the corners. Now, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I want to keep the viewer's eye in the center of the painting. I don't want it to travel out the empty space of that yellow. So I'm just going to bring the viewer into the center with this little trick, okay? You don't have to do that. I mean, as a painter, you can do whatever you want, but it is something. I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to just do a little bit of that up here so that I can keep my viewer more in the center of my painting. So you want to be a bit rooted in what you see and what is, in terms of like paying attention to the dimensions of things, because when people when people know and love a subject, like if this painting were to appeal to somebody who sails, and if the masts were too short, right away they wouldn't be able to stand having this painting in their room because it just would not work for them. So right now this painting is a bit wet, and I'm going to shut off the sound for no, I can't do that, but I'm going to just dry it a bit. Now, I wouldn't do this if I had a lot of paint that was floating around the canvas, because it would blow it around and it would change the appearance of what I have here. But for what I'm doing here, this works pretty well. But you can see one of the things it will do is create some marks sometimes. And I'm just going to blend them out here a little bit with the damp brush. So that we would have a chance to do a little bit more work on this, not have to wait for it to dry. Okay, so then the next thing is that I have shadows here under the boats. And what I'm going to do is make the shadows a bit more blue than this gray that I have here. Just add a little bit of blue to the brown and blue mix that I already did. And I'm just going to start to paint in some shadows. I see some of that masking fluid went down onto the water. But anyway, so I just wet my brush, I wash the color off, and I dab it. I wash the color off, and then I dab it on my paper towel so it's damp but not wet, you know, just damp. And then I pull color down like that for that shadow. Okay? And let me dab a little bit more intense dark. While it's still wet, up near the base of the, unfortunately some of the masking fluid covered the paper there, so I'll have to wait until I take off the masking fluid. But you can see we have a sort of graduated shadow developing. Okay, then I'm going to do that again over on this one. Put in some of that mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna under this boat. The light is creating a shadow. And then bring in a little bit more dark near the base. Yeah. See, that's the beginning of that. I'm not ready to do the shadow of the mast yet because I'm not convinced that the paper is quite dry enough there. So, and let me do this one here, because the paper is still damp. Okay. To be careful when you put your hand on. Sometimes one of the things you can do, I'll just show you. You can use some wax paper or parchment paper and put it under your hand so that you don't get the oils of your hand in the paint and don't spread the paint around under your hand. Okay, so that's one of the things you can do. You can also use either parchment paper, which is used for baking. You can either use parchment paper or wax paper when you're drawing, and it'll help to keep you from smudging the drawing while you're working on it. Okay, and then I'll take a little more of the darker color, darker blue, and dab some of that in here. Okay, so you can see how that works. A little more darker blue, a little phthalo blue. Add that into, I like to add a little slightly different blue into the mix. The phthalo blue is very intense, creates a little more pop. Now I'm, again, completely cleaning my brush and going in and using it to my paper towel, making it dry as I mop up color, wiping some of the color off my brush, trying to blend it in so it works pretty well. I want to blend this in too, so that it kind of starts darker up near the boat and gets lighter as you go toward the edges. And it's such a nice wash there. I don't want my hand messing it up. So that's why I'm doing this like this. I'm going to leave that like that. And then the next thing to do is to think about that little horizon line. Now, I deliberately decided, where do I want my horizon line? And you never want it in the middle of the page. You either want it down here and lots of sky, or up a little higher and less sky. It's better not to have a symmetrical painting, so that's why I don't have these three boats next to each other. One's behind, one's a little over here, so it makes a little shape. And I put the horizon line, in this case, up there. Now the question is, what color should we make our horizon line? Well, to start, I mean, obviously, I think that that's green foliage in the back. But if you use green at this point, see that? See that? My little paper, put that on there, naughty, naughty. So instead, I'm just going to show it as if it's in shadow, you see? And I can always drop, if I want to, a little bit of green in there later. I'm going to avoid making a mess with that. And fortunately, my masking fluid is protecting that little sail there. Sorry for turning this like this, but I need a little bit more toward the horizon at the shore of all that tree line. I'm just dabbing a little more dark in and letting that dark diffuse upward into the paint. So I'm putting it a little lighter color, a lighter mixture of blue and brown to get a neutral gray. And then I'm dropping in some darker blue to let that diffuse up. Okay, I'm going to soften this edge here. I want it a little softer, not a hard edge. And showing a diversity of tree line and elevation here, and some softness in the distance. Okay, and soft edges here, especially since there's bright light above. There should be some soft edges there. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, carry the same thing over. Again, more of a hard edge right on the shoreline, but soft edge. And then I'm going to drop in a little bit of darker blue. And it doesn't have to be even. You don't, in fact, you don't really want it to be even. You just want it to be interesting. And then blend, mixing again. I wet my brush, I wet it, and wash the color off, and then I dry it a little bit on this damp paper towel, and then I can spread my color nicely. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more on the other one, and then the shoreline will be basically close to being done. Now, what's important when you do the shoreline is to make sure you really get that line fairly horizontal, because if it's not, people will look at it and say, oh, how can the water not be horizontal up at the shore? So, now I could put some more mountains behind this if I wanted, to indicate that there's mountains behind, but I'm not going to do that. I think that's enough to indicate the shoreline. And there we are. Now, to do anything more on this painting at this time would be a mistake, because this is still very damp, and if I try to draw a nice little reflection line there now, it'll diffuse and look messy. And I would like to take my masking fluid off so that I can paint the details of the boat, but that can't be done until the paper is completely dry. So we're going to have to take a break at this point, and I'll come back later. Thanks for visiting. Hope you enjoyed it. Hi everybody. I'm back, and I wanted to see if the masking fluid came off well, and it did. And I added a little bit of orange mixed with brown in here to deepen the color. Otherwise, pretty much as we left it. I wanted to show you how I remove the masking fluid. So first I put some masking fluid, and then I let it dry, and I poured some green paint over it. And you can see the green paint. And then I wanted to show you how we can also just add some more masking fluid on top of some of the green paint, and add some black paint on top of that. And you can see that the masking fluid preserves the green paint areas, then let the black paint show. With a bit of, you can see some transparency of the green below the black. So that gives you an idea how the masking fluid works. And so you can do multiple layers of colors with that, and all you need to do is basically rub it off. It's just rubbing it off, okay? So that's what I did. If it's very thin, you may have to use some masking tape to help pull it up, but it behaves like rubber cement. Okay, so now that we have gotten to this point in our painting, the next step is to bring in some of the details of the boats and some of the lines of the mass. So I'm going to work on that. Okay, so for the fine lines, I'm going to use my rigger, which gives you a very fine line. For some of the details of the boat, I'm going to use this small brush. So let's see, pretty much for the boats, I'm going to use I'm going to use neutrals made out of blacks and other darks, because most of it is in shadow. So let's see here. I want on the boat, where it's white, where the boats are white, I'm going to use some blues. To make those shadows, mixed with a little bit of black. And any blue will do. I probably will be using cobalt blue because it's transparent, and I don't really want the boats to look like they're granulated. So the back of the boat is in shadow, and the bottom of the boat is in shadow. So I'm just going to, and I wet my brush, and like before, I carry the color through with the wet brush. Make that boat look like it's in shadow. Let me just put a little more here. I don't know, I may have to. I'm working a little wet there. And it gets lighter and lighter as it goes up to the top of the boat. Okay, so I'll do the same with the other boat. There's no reason to think that the boats are very different. We don't want to really put a lot of detail in that makes the boats look different, because then it just draws the eye to a specific place in the painting. And we want the eye to just see the whole of the painting. So we don't want to like make one boat red and have everyone looking just at that. And I showed you a photograph before. I have pretty good detail of these boats in my sailing book. And like I said, I've always, when I'm going to work a lot on a subject, and I did a number of boat and sea pictures, I have a tendency to collect good books that really show details. Now, the books that I have show all the breakdown of the mast and the rigging of different kinds of sailing boats, which is nice. I did the same thing when I did a lot of cars. I did about 35, 40 paintings of cars when I was being the resident artist at Lime Rock, and doing some commissions also there from the race car owners. And I bought a lot of books on cars and racing, historic books that were about the vintage race cars. So there's some more details. I have to be very careful. There's a little bit of details of some windows here. careful not to overdo anything. This here is a space of darkness where they can go inside. So I want to show that, but carefully. I had put some yellow there to indicate the reflection from the sky. So there is a little bit of yellow. See, I'm doing this pretty carefully, and I've got a little area where they can go inside here. And I just want to indicate some of those things. So I'm just indicating that, not very much. And over here it's the same thing. There's a space to go inside here under that roof. And I'm just going to indicate the edge of the roof very lightly. If I were a little more creative, I might add some people on the top of the boat, kind of lounging around and having some fun, but that's a little more work than I feel like doing. And if you're not real careful about adding some people and they don't look exactly right, then it can ruin the whole painting. Now over here there's some, this is that some of that sail tied up there in that cover. So I just want to carefully make that a little more clear. And again, this is also a sail that's in a cover. I'm just building up my color very carefully because this is not going to be easy and convenient to scrub. So, and then there's another sail here in the cover. And I don't want it to just look like a big blob. So, and that one, as it's a bigger sail and a bigger boat, I'm going to put a little more definition of a shadow. I'll put a little shadow in there too. Okay. I want to just add a little bit more difference in the darkness so that it's not all one color. And so, while I'm not showing precise detail, the eye will create some sense of detail. That something's going on here with this boat. And okay, now, the next thing is to indicate the mast, because the mast is really the one thing that defines the boat almost more than anything. And that has to be done very carefully, because if I mess up this line, make it too thick, it'll be hard to fix. So don't put too much paint on the Now I'm going to turn this so that I can try to do this without smudging the one that's already been done. Just so you can see that I'm trying to very carefully. Now this boat is a little closer, so it looks a little bigger because it's closer. So the mask should be a little more prominent, a little wider. Can't look so narrow that it looks like it's going to break. And I mentioned yesterday that I measured the mass in the boats, and they seem to be about a ratio of 6 to 1. Okay, and the same with this. The mass has to go down. It's a bigger boat, so it has a bigger mast. Even though the boat's a little further away, I'm making it a little thicker. Okay, now I'm going to use my rigger, which is even more fine than this brush, and use the same black for this cross tie. And the pencil lines, I think, show through dark enough under the paint that I don't have to draw in all the lines, but I could do some. It's a risk, because if they look too thick, it'll be distracting. So I think I'll just leave them as pencil lines, and I'm going to indicate these little flags up here. That are flapping in the breeze. And since they're all in the same breeze, they're all going in the same direction. Okay. I think I'll just touch this up just a little bit because it's a little uneven looking. Okay. Now, as we discussed before, reflections come down from the boat. Now, near the top of the boat, near the top of the reflection, it'll be a little bit wider. So I'm going to start making it like loose, and it'll be jiggling a little bit. It'll be I know I put in some yesterday, but it'll jiggle a little bit with the ripples near the boat. So there's a thing there that So I had put in shadow, but now I'm putting in reflection, which is a little different than shadow. Shadow, the light is here, so shadow comes this way, whereas the reflection is always to the eye of the viewer. So I'm going to put the shadow showing in a way it's a little bit more this way than now. Reflection always is to the eye of the viewer. So I'm just going to indicate again some ripples of the reflection. Now I'm going to use the rigger, which is a little more fine. To show that reflection coming down. And oftentimes, I mean, the reflection will be a little longer than the object. So we're going to really bring this down quite a bit toward the viewer, okay? And where the ripples are a little more, there's some ripples that are stronger and some that are not. So this gives you a sense of, now I'm using a very watery black for this. Ivory black, very watery, not adding any colors to it. So it's because I'm putting a lot of water in it, it's and the thing is to make it kind of interesting. These marks are very, very important in watercolor. So this ripple is what's called a calligraphic mark. Okay? A lot of times when I look at marks in a painting, I can tell who did the painting, because people have their own style of doing their marks. Just like they have their own brush stroke, but their marks, you can tell a lot. And I'm going to go down in the center of this ripple, and where the mast is in the center, you know, just make it a little stronger in the center. Okay, I'm going to carry this down. And I'm going to bring in some darker color because I feel it's important that there be some diversity in my mark, that it's not all kind of a gray. Okay, so you can see this is my calligraphic mark. And there. And it just kind of comes down. So you can see that where here it's a little bit too dark there. Now, there's another series of lines that are important on the boat, and that's the railings. So I'm just going to show those railings with my rigger, my very thin, fine rigger. I had drawn them in pencil, so I'm just going over those pencil lines. But they're wider and stronger than the wires. Continue the mast here. So I'm going to paint them in, whereas I think I'm still undecided whether I'll show any of those sometimes just make some marks to indicate something's going on here. And it doesn't have to be clear, but just the main features are the area where people can go inside, and these railings, and the shape of the boat. You don't want too much detail because then it'll be distracting. So, okay, the railing. Let's see here. Can't see it quite as well. I think that's probably just about enough detail on this painting. Too much and it'll be a distraction. Now, yeah, I think it's. Hi.